So the other day I sat down to meditate just before recording a video, and the reason I sat down is because before recording a video it's good to sit down, clear your head, because when you talk unscripted on camera like this you really don't want too many thoughts knocking around your head. You want to be clear thinking, so the sort of intelligence can come to you and you can just speak fluently and concise. So anyway, I've sit down, and as usually happens when you meditate, your mind will start to drift naturally. And most of the time it's boring, mundane stuff like what you've got to do later, what are you going to have for lunch, or any petty worries that you've got within your life. But sometimes I let my mind drift off, because the places that it takes me can lead me to some very insightful thoughts. I find that I can actually solve a lot of these smaller issues, especially when it's less so outside stuff, more so internal stuff. When you sit down, you can actually solve some of these issues. So sometimes I let my mind drift off and it takes you to some pretty insightful places. And on this occasion, it took me to an analogy for how the mind and consciousness basically is. I'll get into that in just 1 second. But the reason I say this is because when you put an analogy to something that's kind of nebulous, like the consciousness, when you can imagine it as something more tangible, something that you can actually envision in your head. Like when I say consciousness, you don't really see an image, but what I'm about to tell you will sort of hopefully make you be able to see it in your mind's eye much better, and then you can essentially utilize it, and sort of when it comes to it you can sort of apply that, and it just makes things a little bit easier. So what I came up with at the time was that the mind is like a clam with a pearl in its mouth, and when you're young, the pearl is growing, and it's growing by feeding off any and all knowledge that it can possibly absorb, usually from role models, parents, etc., the surrounding world. And it's open, the clam is wide open, because it needs to feed the pearl with as much of this knowledge as it possibly can in as short amount of time as possible, because when you're growing, that's what you need. And as you get older, the clam starts to close up. As the pearl gets more and more knowledge, it gets more and more set in its ways, it gets more and more opinionated, and it gets sort of more married to its opinions. It closes up, and it starts not to want to let opposing beliefs in, because humans are creatures of habit, and birds of a feather will flock together. So a quick example is like, you have your Andrew Tate lovers over here, and you have your blue-haired liberals over here, and they're not going to mingle together. One, because they hold pretty powerfully opposing beliefs about whatever, but secondly, they're not very likely to hear each other's side of the story out. So they're just not going to mingle together, and neither of them will want to accept any ideologies from the opposing party. Therefore, each party will just sort of revolve around and only include people that hold the same opinions that they already hold. And I caught myself out doing this the other day, where I was listening to a modern wisdom podcast, and some woman was on it talking about how she believes that you should behave on social media in terms of like your personal life. Some of the stuff I agreed with, but on the whole, I didn't really agree with what she was saying. And I was about to go and turn it off, and I stopped for 1 second and thought, like, how small-minded, how petty, and how ignorant is it to just immediately turn something off as soon as I don't agree with what she's saying. And so I continued to listen to the podcast because I wanted to understand an opposing side of the story. Now, with this particular topic, it's not the most important, but the principle is pretty important, because if I'm just going to basically shut out anything that doesn't already include what I already think, then I'm never going to grow. I'm just going to be ignorant, closed-minded, and that's no good. You can't. That's basically the essence of philosophy. You want to learn as much as possible. But anyway, in recent days since this meditation, I could actually come up with a slightly better one, and that is, the mind is like the sky, and the infinite intelligence is like the sunshine, And you have these little mundane thoughts, as I say, things like what you've got to do today, your petty troubles, I've got to take the dog to the vet, I need to clean the house, you know, your missus broke up with you, or you've had a bad day at work. So it's like boring stuff like that, that's just whizzing around your head. Those are just like smaller little wispy clouds. But then you've got the big, thick, dirty, black storm clouds, and these are your dogmatic opinions that you have usually been brought up with. And a side tangent here, actually, a lot of what people believe is their own beliefs, and that their true self believes is, for lack of a better word, indoctrinated into them by their parents in their formative years, just by the parents just putting their opinions onto their children. I don't think it's malicious most of the time, but sometimes they can be, and people just need to realize, like, it's not necessarily their true self's opinion that they're holding. It's an opinion that's been cast onto them so deeply from such a young and important age that they believe it to be theirs. But I'm digressing a little bit here. Oh, where was I? So yeah, you've got these dogmatic opinions that are really, and then all of these come together and just fill up the sky and completely block out the sun. And as I say, the sun is that infinite intelligence, and if you want to progress in life, if you want to achieve new things, especially if you're a creative person, you want to be able to receive that sunlight. Because especially in the field of creativity, music, we'll just use art as an example, contemporary art. If you're a painter, even if you're heavily inspired by someone else's work, but if you're creating new artwork, then that is not something that you've seen. That is not something that your conscious mind has looked at and put onto a canvas. That's something that's come from within your brain. Essentially, it's popped out of thin air. And what I believe, and what a lot of other people believe, is that it comes from the universe, basically. You just have to be open to receive it. And you're not open to receiving these things if, one, you're too wrapped up in your own bubble by these dogmatic opinions that just cover the sky. And even if you're open-minded to opposing sides of whatever story it is, if you have too many of the pettier, thinner, wispy clouds rushing around your head throughout the day as well, you're not, again, the sun's still not getting through, and you're not able to think clearly and receive that intelligence. So that's why it's very important to me to, one, make sure I keep a clear head. If there are so many times within the week where I'm not really thinking about anything in particular and my mind is just rushing around with bullshit thoughts. And also, I try to make sure that I'm hearing other sides of the story, sides that I might know that I don't agree with. Because I believe most people are pretty logical. Like myself, if I hold an opinion, it's because I've logically gone through the criteria and decided X or Y. Just the same as other people are going to go through the same sort of criteria and come up with their own opinion on the matter. So I like to try and understand where they're coming from as well. Even if they don't end up changing my mind, it's good to have that different perspective, because it keeps your mind open and fresh, and you don't want to be ignorant. You want to accept all sides of the story. You want to be able to hear the whole thing, and then only then can you formulate your true opinion. Because if all you're feeding from is the right side, say we'll get political here, if you're feeding just from the right side, then you're only hearing half the story, and half the story is never the truth. Social media is pretty bad for this, because this is exactly why people on the internet seem so at each other's throats. People are either aggressively right, Andrew Tate, Piers Morgan lovers and whatever, or seems like there's just lesbians and trannies and blue-haired people on the liberal side. And both of the parties are just going at each other's throats because their social media feeds are feeding them only what they want to see. The Tate lovers are just receiving, I keep saying Tate lovers, but we'll just call them the right. They're only receiving that side of the story. they're hearing all the good stuff about their party, and they're hearing all the bad stuff about the other party, and vice versa. Both parties are just getting the best of what they already believe and the worst of the other side, and neither of them are really getting the full story, and they don't even realize that it's happening. So this is very important to make sure that you're taking the whole thing so that you can formulate your own truth. And that's just like a very helpful way for me to navigate life. One, because it allows me to get into a positive state, basically positive state for recording, for creation, and just life in general. I don't want to get too bogged down on one side of the story. I don't want to start hating one side of the equation too much either. I like to be down the middle and always formulate my own truth.